We're going to open the April 22nd meeting of the Middleton Plan Commission. First item on the agenda is the roll call.
Adams.
Here.
Harp.
Here.
Aniro. Here. Paulson.
Here.
Summers.
Here.
Bruce. Bruce not yet here. And Sonntag is present.
Okay. Next item is our public hearings. Just remind everybody you're limited to 3 minutes per speaker. And Mark, you would like to make some comments?
Yeah.
Before we begin?
I just thought it would be helpful to frame a couple things. So the public is welcome to speak on any aspect of the zoning code, but any amendment to the zoning text that doesn't flow from the changes that were advertised would require holding a second public hearing. In contrast, it is permissible for the commission to adjust language pertaining to changes that were identified in the hearing draft of the ordinance, for example, making additional changes to the definition of building height. But if it's something that somebody is saying, well, I'd like the zoning code to be changed in this way, and it wasn't something we advertised, then it was my opinion, and the city attorney is in agreement, that something that wasn't advertised that you wish to change would have to be subject to a second hearing. Okay. And then the other comment I wanted to make before we open the hearing is that it's now the Plan Commission standard practice to not take action the same night as a hearing. I had inadvertently mentioned that in my staff comments that you may take action tonight, but it's the standard practice now not to take action at the same meeting.
So that means no vote tonight.
Correct. That's become the standard practice.
But for clarification, one, we can discuss,
Oh, yeah.
correct? And two, if
Provide
we
guidance.
did have to hold a second hearing, that could be done at the council level? Or
No,
does it
it
have
could-
to
well-
be a plan commission?
So a little over a year ago, when there was the need for a second hearing, I think that was held at the council. It's not required to be held at the council, it could be held at the Plan Commission level.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And further clarification, we can
Oh.
amend the current draft, right? Before we,
Yes.
but we're not going to make final recommendation to council
Yeah,
today.
so if you wish to provide guidance, so we can get into this after the hearing.
Got it.
The
Yeah.
procedures if you wish. And we do have written statements. Once you open the hearing, I can mention the statements we received, Kurt.
Okay. Well, let me, just in case nobody heard, I officially opened the public hearing. So
Okay.
Abby, take it.
Oh,
First commenter is T-Wall. Please come up to the mic.
and what I wanted to say was that we received written statements from Ann Broddick, 7600 Terrace Avenue, Julie Waldron, 7704 Hillcrest Avenue, Julie Colmer Davis and Evan Davis at 7739 Hillcrest Avenue, Ann Johnson, 1720 Aurora Street, Bill Connors, Smart Growth Greater Madison, Inc. And then shortly before the meeting, after we published the packet this afternoon, or republished it, we received statements from Ginny Corwin of Middleton Beach Road Neighbors Association and Thomas Jansma, M&T Real Estate Investments. So I just wanted to get that so that people knew that their comments were received.
Sure.
Sorry, Terrence.
Thank you. I'm Terrence Wall. I would ask you to reject this proposal to define the building height. And the reason is that the building code already defines building height. So I don't see why Middleton needs to have its own special, unique definition of building height that cannot be found in other parts of the state. It's already taken care of in the building code. In addition, having read this as a real estate professional, I can tell you it's extremely confusing. There are things that are not thought of and that are going to result in discriminatory decision-making. One developer may get a yes and another developer may get a no because they got to go to staff to interpret this. It's very onerous and it's not well written. And I don't mean to be offending to anybody, but it's really difficult to understand. It doesn't take into account a parapet, for example. How would you define the roof if there's a parapet, and how high is the parapet, et cetera. And the result could be that you won't have any parapets going forward because under this, it'll be interpreted as part of the roof height. And that's not what you should have. The roof is the roof, a parapet is a parapet. They're two different things and that shouldn't be counted. So I would just ask you to reject this. The other part is that this turns a basement into a first floor, the way I read it. That's not what the building code says. It's very specific in the building code, how to define a basement versus a first floor. When I mean a basement, an exposed basement, where part of the basement is exposed, maybe even has a door or a facade that's for a tenant. This is contrary to that. And so you're going to end up doing something that maybe you intend, maybe you don't intend. I don't know what the true intent is here. I don't understand why you need this. But it looks like this is intended to try to stop a particular development, not ours, but it's going to end up punishing all the proposed developments because it's going to make things more confusing, onerous. How do you define this? How do you design the building? Should we leave a parapet off? How should we, should we put a gable on? Should we not? How do we, design this to get the maximum, we can? What's this 12-foot thing? I do not understand that. What does that mean when whatever it says here, it just doesn't make any sense as a professional. So I just, I'm very confused by it. I would urge you not to pass it and just, rely on the building code. It's there. It's international. It's used by everybody in the state and it's clear. Everybody understands it. The architects understand it. They don't have to, the architect doesn't have to understand something unique about this particular city versus other cities and villages. So, I'm not trying to offend anybody, but I just don't see this as being necessary. It looks like it's trying to be used to defeat a project, and I don't know what that is, but that's what it looks like to me. But thank you.
Hey, Terrence, just for clarification, when you say building code, you're talking about the international.
Yes, the International Building Code, which Wisconsin uses.
Very good.
The statewide commercial building code, not the uniform dwelling code. But for anything with three or more dwelling units per building.
Yeah, the
IBC.
Yeah, that's going to say International Building Code, IBC. Yeah. Thank you.
Next up is Jeff Kramer.
Good evening, everyone. Jeff Kramer, Kramer Development. I wanted to discuss with the Plan Commission the idea of adding indoor sales to the research park zoning. And I'm kind of late to the party here. I'm sorry that came in at this point, but recently got involved in a property that I noticed was zoned research park. There's only a few of them in Middleton, it seems like, by looking at the maps. And I'll give you a couple of examples. The site that Meritor owns off the Beltline, if they were to sell that, that would be a great grocery store site. And it's not permitted under the research park zoning. Could also be a large scale health club, home improvement, that kind of thing. And then secondly, the properties on the south side of University Avenue where Mounds Pet Food Warehouse is. That's another good example. That could be a great specialty grocery store, flooring store, general merchandising, that kind of thing. The current zoning allows for outdoor sales. It also allows for outdoor commercial entertainment. Both of those seem odd to me to be in that research park zoning when indoor sales and service is not. And that's kind of a catch-all for general retail. So I'd like the Plan Commission to consider that. It seems to fit within the research park concept of supporting the employees and the businesses in those areas. And right now you can do a restaurant, you can do a drive-through, some of those pure retail type uses, but they're more focused on food and beverage. I think the general retailing concept should be considered, added to this property or this zoning type.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Next up is John Bechtel.
Hi, good evening, and thank you, commissioners, for taking your time out of the beautiful evening outside to come sit in here and listen to all this. I want to say up front that I agree with the highlighted changes that were put out in the agenda. Specifically, the average height of the facade facing the front lot line may not exceed the maximum height allowed in the zoning in which it is located. I also like the established grade highlighted, where specifically that the grade shall be the average level of the natural surface of the ground at the two major corners of the building facing the front lot line. I thought those two are great changes. They're easy to understand and great work by the staff. One thing I'm a little confused on is under the building height, where it says that facade facing other than the front lot line can be 12 feet higher. And maybe I just am not understanding why that would happen. But it seems like if there's a maximum height, there's a maximum height. So maybe I'm just misunderstanding. But I've been living in Middleton over 20 years, and I appreciate the city staff and the planning commissioners considering what's best for the city's residents. And I just ask that you not tailor ordinances and change zoning to meet the needs of developers that come into town, who may buy cheaper property knowing full well that the zoning doesn't meet their needs, or their plan does not meet the ordinance requirements, and then try and pressure Middleton city staff to change that. I ask that you resist the pressure to do that, and you maintain the residents' best interest at heart. One other comment I wanted to make about additional dwelling units, which I know you're considering whether or not the park fee, but I know you're also considering making it 2-lot or 2-family lot eligible to have ADUs. Growing up in a city that had experienced an ADU explosion, I would ask that you consider examining parking if you do that. I saw small residential streets turn into bumper-to-bumper parking really overnight because of all the ADUs that went up. Every ADU is going to be 1 or 2 additional cars. And that's not going to go in a driveway probably. It's probably going to be out in the street. So just consider the parking. And that was in a warm climate. So here, an alternate side parking during the winter, that's going to be a real problem. So I would just ask that you consider that as you examine the ADU options. Particularly if the property is located to somewhere that already has dense parking, like downtown or near Century Avenue where there's no parking. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Could I ask a clarification?
Yeah.
John,
John?
I didn't hear the word, and I'm wondering if others didn't hear it either. You said consider exempting parking? Is that the word you used? Or
Examining. I'm sorry,
Okay.
examining.
I'm
Just
sorry, I didn't hear you.
consider the
That
parking. I
makes
know
a
you're
lot
looking
more
at
sense.
fees and all that, but
Okay.
just as someone who's experienced it, examine.
Thank you.
Mark's
That,
just deaf.
that make what? That makes a lot more
Exactly.
sense.
Mark's just dense. What you said.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Next up is Angie Ostrom.
Hello, my name's Angie Ostrom. I live at 7708 Hillcrest Avenue, Middleton. Actually, I don't have comments, but I have a couple of questions regarding the changes. The building height, the 12-foot step up that's referenced from front to back, does that include the HVAC or anything else that is placed on the roof? The 315-page doc was a little hard for me to get through. So it may be in there. I just could not find it. But if not, my question is, does that 12-foot step up include anything on the roof? And secondly, if not, is there a height stipulation with regards to anything placed on the roof? I mean, HVAC, I don't, specifically, I'm talking about the proposed 70-unit apartment on Terrace Avenue, because this has direct impact on that proposal. So our question is if there's no stipulation, shouldn't there be?
Okay.
That's all I have.
Mark, you,
I'll get into that when we have discussion. Unless you want me to address it now.
well, it's up to you.
Well, you're
Let's
the
do it
chair.
all later,
All right, that's fine.
because if a similar comment comes up, you only have to say it once.
Yeah, good point. Thank you, Angie. Anybody else?
Don't see anybody on the Zoom with their hand.
Will you put your key in and blow your nose? Why? Well, because you're sniffing, trying to blow.
Was there anybody on the Zoom who wished to speak for the public hearing?
Doesn't look like it.
Don't see anybody.
Okay. If there's nobody else that would like to speak, I will close the public hearing and go to minutes of the April 8th Plan Commission meeting. Is there any changes? Are there any changes rather? Comments? Additions, deletions? Hearing none, then I will approve the minutes from the April 8th. And that gets us on to the last, our only agenda item really is the revisions to zoning ordinance, chapter 10 of the municipal code. So this is the time for discussion. Any amplification? Mark?
Sure, be happy to answer some questions that were, or address some questions that were raised. I'll start with the last speaker because it relates to the first speaker too. So the zoning code has in Article 4, section 10.04.20, if it's not.
Can you say that again?
10.0420 is called exceptions to maximum height regulations. And the first speaker and our last speaker both asked questions related to this. So we have building height maximums defined for every zoning district, but then in Article 4, we have exceptions to those heights. And I know that I've talked about this before with the first speaker. So parapets, for example, are allowed to extend into the, well, here, you can see the language in front of you.
Not more than
Minor
5
projections,
feet.
Not more than 5 feet. The HVAC, there's references to exhaust pipes a little higher, the 5th line. Skylights, telecommunications tower antennas, satellite dishes, things like that. So I would call those utilities are allowed to encroach or project as well. We do have some screening requirements, which is separate from this section. But in terms of height, the height is measured to the midpoint of the highest gable or other types of roof structures are defined. But then this paragraph here lists the types of minor projections, which should address the previous speaker's questions.
And Mark?
Yes.
Because those are generally in commercial buildings, those would also be subject to design review.
And they have a screening.
And a screening
exactly
requirement.
requirement. The 12-foot measurement that has come up. I guess the easiest way to describe this, first of all, let me back up. There are, in the current zoning code that was adopted last year, there are 5 references to established grade. They are found under the actual definition of building height. It says the vertical distance from the established grade to, and then it lists various things. They are found in the site plan, in the minor accessory structures table for a patio or freestanding deck. It says not more than 1 foot above established grade. And they are found in the 3 places in the site plan review section. There's references to established grade, but established grade as a term is not defined anywhere in the zoning code. So that was a problem that we identified early last year. It was one of the first changes we needed to address. At the time, I did some research, looked at some other communities, found some similar language across several communities, and I think I ended up using one from Downers Grove, Illinois, and that's what this one was largely based on, although we've tweaked it since then. So that's the evolution of the term established grade. This is something that we discussed with the Plan Commission over the course of several meetings last year, publicly noticed meetings. We had input from the first speaker, as well as the Smart Growth Madison provided input. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is that we have endeavored to be very responsive to all the comments that we have received. And I appreciate hearing from the neighbors of Terrace Avenue that the changes we made in last Thursday and further tweaked them this afternoon continue to be in response to comments we have received. So I appreciate that that is being recognized. The building height definition itself has been evolving, including this afternoon, and I don't know how easy it is, Daphne, for you to pull up the memo I just sent. I had a copy back there and someone took it. It was for public review, and that's okay. It's one at the Plan Commission places. So the concept of building height, just stay at the top. So the first section where it says building height, and it's just the yellow highlighting, that is the language that what you see that's in red was what was in the hearing notice. What you see in yellow is what I proposed adding to the ordinance that was in the hearing. That was the hearing version of the ordinance, and that was last Thursday's language. There you go. And I guess I'll talk about this a little bit. So here again, the concerns of residents near downtown, south of downtown, raised an understandable concern about the original system that we had gravitated toward last summer, where we took the average of 4 points on a property, the four corners, could have resulted in using since it's been mentioned, I'll mention that property, the Verns site, has about, let's say it has 25 feet of change in topography. I'm just picking a number, but it's around that amount. So in theory, you could have the front two corners be, let's say, at 920 feet, and then the back two are at 945 feet. I'm just picking numbers.
Feet above sea level,
Above sea level.
not the actual building height, above established grade.
Feet above sea level. Thank you. So the result of that, of simply taking an average of those four corners, is you would end up with something that splits the difference, and you could end up with an extra 12 feet on a building, or an extra story, let's call it, although we're not using the term story as the same anymore. But you would end up with a higher building facade facing Terrace Avenue. And that was an astute observation that we felt, okay, that was an unintended consequence. And so that's why the language here that says the average height in yellow, the average height of the facade facing the front lot line may not exceed the maximum height allowed by the zoning district. And that average height measurement, the word average now is going to be further revised, but the concept of that is measuring it from left to right, the average. So if one point in the front is lower than another point, it would be the average of the two. The reason why I proposed adding the language about the 12 feet is because when you start thinking about using the Terrace Avenue site as an example, you start going up the hill, that average 1 point at 920 above sea level and 945, you could have a really big facade, it could step up and result in a really high facade that's more than, in that case, you could even have it be more than 12 feet above what the front facade is. So I just felt, since 12 feet is kind of our unit of measurement that we assign to a story, that's been rooted in our zoning ordinance since we adopted it last year, I proposed that we have that limitation so that you have some constraints to the height of the building as viewed from other angles. If you could scroll down, please. So the additional input received today from Smart Growth Greater Madison prompted me to propose this language with our city attorney. He actually drafted some of this. He made the observation that we actually didn't explicitly state how we were measuring building height, even though it was implied. So he suggested adding the word building height shall be determined separately for each facade facing a lot line, which had been that's how I had been interpreting the code anyway, which had been a source of concern. So we're explicitly stating that. The second sentence there in teal says the height of the facade facing the front lot line may not exceed the maximum height allowed by the zoning district in which the site is located. And that's the Terrace Avenue provision, if you will. We then are proposing striking a portion of what I recommended on Thursday, and instead simply saying, well, that's actually incorporated into the sentence I just read. And then we would continue with no part of the facade facing any other lot line may be more than 12 feet higher than the building height of the front facade. And so it just, to me, seems very clear what the intent is and how it's to be measured. Where there's a concern raised by the first speaker, by Mr. Wall, is what is the established grade and why aren't we using a international building code as the standard? And I guess my response to that would be, I'm not aware of too many communities that do cite the building code, the international building code, and I'd be curious to know how many in Dane County do that. The building code regulates safety. It doesn't regulate design or how a property relates to surrounding properties. That's what a zoning code does. So having the building code itself, the international building code definition, which actually the words he used, our attorney, thought it was funny, so I thought I'd mention it. We had it here. The zoning code is concerned with building design and the effects on its surroundings, whereas the building code is focused on safety. As our attorney noted, the building code doesn't give two hoots about how the building presents to the surrounding area. And that is what we are trying to do with our zoning regulations. We are trying to make sure that we define the parameters of what can be built on a property, but also so that the neighbors know that they're protected from if something's higher than they might expect that could affect the solar angle, you know, the amount of sun that reaches their property. So we do need to have certain rules that that protect neighbors' interests as well. And the established grade concept and the building code concept that the first speaker mentioned gives some allowance for a building sticking out of the ground. And the concern I have with that is that you can alter a site and mess with the grades so that you can end up having a taller building. And that is why we're trying to establish or to designate what established grade is so that the building is in relation to the established grade and not based on some artificial height that is coming in based on the design of the building. So I guess that's as best as I can respond to that. I don't know what other clips.
Can we,
Everything shut off? Oh, just our screen. Are there any questions, I guess, at this point?
so
Go ahead, Kurt.
if I remember, and I'm trying to pull up the building code, it is one measure for a whole building, and it's the vertical distance between the average grade and the highest point of the building. Is that right? That sounds right to me. And it sure sounded right, but I mean, I think you're absolutely right about that would give you one measure, and the ambiguity in that for zoning relative to neighbors is whether something's a 5-story building or a 6-story building. So if I understand your 12-foot issue, this addresses the change in building height that might obtain on a parcel that slopes down from the street or up. Because it's a balance between on a parcel that slopes down, the developer wants a full extra story and the neighbors want
May want.
no extra story.
Right.
Right. So this is a compromise which says you're choosing the height based on the front, which seems right, which is consistent with our current zoning. Right. And that's the way most cities are going to measure building height, is at the front parcel. But if it slopes down, a developer shouldn't be necessarily punished and have to lop off half of a story if that slope is more steep than 1 to 12.
Yeah, this was Castle Rock as an example.
Right.
That might be a good example.
And so this says then you could get that full story, but the final height at the back, which abuts the neighbors, can't be more than 12 feet above the front height, right? So that,
Right.
I mean, if you look at a building, it's going to be horizontal, the roof is, right? But because the land slopes, it doesn't require the building to knock off the back story. Is that right? But I don't know how this addresses when the land slopes from side to side in the front, like along University Avenue, like some of the stuff over by,
The one by the new apartment building that went up a couple of years ago.
right, because if you take the average grade and the average grade, if there's a greater than a 1 to 12 slope, then the average grade would be, it would lop off a story on that, right?
In that
We,
case,
we should probably just get pictures and measure again, but
so the Curiad is the one, is the project I'm thinking of, the one near the Madison city limits. So that one is lower on the left side. I don't know if we have a street view image of that yet. I think Daphne's looking for it. But that one has, so if you measure that left to right, the left side is clearly lower by quite a few feet. I would just take the average height between the left and right points, and that would be the height of the building based on how we're defining the ordinance, based on this definition. Some of that's going to be cut into the ground, obviously, because of, here's a picture. Or Abby's
yeah,
found it.
I mean, at one level, you're concerned about
Oh,
a
that's,
developer berming something to get an extra floor, but this might induce you to cut the grade to get an extra, right? So if you look at that slope, you have a partially exposed floor, and that is not the first floor. That shouldn't count against the height limit, right? But this average is,
so
this average height difference is gonna be less than 12 feet
yeah, I mean, I would take.
over the whole parcel.
I would take the point on the lower left, left of the fence, and then the point at the right, and whatever that natural grade was. The midpoint of that would be where I would measure the building height.
Okay.
So I think the concern from some developers has been, they don't want any of that basement area counted against height, and I understand that.
And this wouldn't.
In this case, it maybe by a little bit it would. But the observation I would have is that, well, first of all, our zoning ordinance has given far greater building height permissiveness along our corridors than what was previously there. I think that needs to be recognized for starters. Most of these corridors were capped at 35 feet until our new zoning ordinance was adopted.
Yeah.
They now have a right of, I think it's 60 feet. So there's already the city has been responsive to infill and density along our corridors. I think that needs to be stated out of the gate. The question now is, well, we want 5 feet plus when there's topography to deal with. So I think that is the context that we should also be acknowledging. The concern is we do have some topography in the city to deal with. And when neighbors see a big facade, let's use our own the Municipal Operations Center as an example. There's a building that's set into a hillside and there's a large exposed foundation wall. That has an aesthetic appearance that a neighbor may not care for, or, that may have an impact on the neighbors. So, and I'm kind of regretting using that example, but I'm using that example.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not regretting that's a city example. I'm just
Good
saying
mural.
it's kind of far flung. Stagecoach is another example, Stagecoach Apartments, that's got a large exposed lower level facing the Conservancy, which has an aesthetic impact. So I think it's important to recognize that there's this impact that on neighboring properties that that isn't accounted for by just referring to the International Building Code building height definition. I think that's where I was coming
And we
from.
would have design control over what that facade looks like.
Yeah.
But I guess if I'm thinking of the mock, the operations center, is that a 1-story building or a 2-story building? To me, that's a 1-story building.
It's a very large, has a very high ceiling. And just to clarify for the public's benefit, the revisions are taking away almost entirely the reference to stories.
I know.
Yeah.
But see, I see Stagecoach and I remember this argument, and this is a 3-story building to me.
Yeah. But a neighbor might see that as a 4-story building if they
But
were.
those are parapets and roofs. That's not a separate story, back when we regulated stories. And then because of the slope of the parcel, you have to do something. You're not going to step back the building to lose a whole story towards the back, because that makes the building economically unfeasible, both from an engineering architecture standpoint, but also from a square footage.
I might debate that
Can
with
I
you, but
point out something in this
Yeah.
image? Oh,
go back.
Yeah.
to it.
can we go back to the way it was showing before? Because one of the questions that was asked by a commenter, I had the same question, and it is just the concept of what does it mean to allow the back of the building, for example, to be 12 feet higher than the front? That isn't what we're talking about. In this case, as Commissioner Paulson said, I think of the roof as a flat roof. It's just that at the back of the building, measured from the established grade to the top of the roof, can be 12 feet higher than that same measurement in the front, correct? We're not talking about allowing the building in the back to extend 12 feet above the building in the front.
Correct.
That's, I just
Correct.
want to be clear on that because I think one could read the language of no
Mhm.
part of this facade facing any other lot line may be more than 12 feet higher than the building height of the front facade.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
you could be referring to the,
Mhm.
the number, but a different interpretation could be, oh, the back can be 12 feet sticking up above the front, and that's not what we're talking about. So we need to make sure that is
I
clear.
agree,
Yep.
I agree. Because one way to read that would then be that Jacob could have added an extra floor on those kind of back three.
But just, so the memo that I gave you tonight says building height shall be determined separately for each facade facing a lot line. For this building, for Stagecoach, I would be referring to the height, looking at the facade facing the green space, the conservancy. We have a left side and a right side. I would be taking the mean of those two elevations, and that would be the height of the building facing that side. So it would be more than using stories as an example, this would be essentially a 4-story building.
Right.
So, and
I know we discussed this and I'm
Yeah.
getting old and forgetful. What is wrong with just measuring the height of Stagecoach here from the frontage? Every parcel, every building has frontage on one main street. When we do site plan review or building review, you identify what is the front, right? So if they tried to say the conservancy is the front, we'd say, no, that's not a front because that's not a street. This is a 35-foot building at the front. Then when we look at design review, if he stepped up a floor, we would say, no, that's adding an extra floor. I know, I'm doing stories again.
that's fine. I mean, I know what you mean. Well, thinking of Castle Rock as an example, or maybe a good example would be something south of downtown here. If a building were located on South Avenue,
Mhm.
up on the hill, and the backyard falls to downtown Middleton, suddenly you could have I don't know how much where the hill falls there, but you could theoretically suddenly, actually Chickahawk's a great example in Alder Hanairo's district,
Yeah.
where suddenly you have a much greater exposed, that's actually one of the best examples I can think of. You suddenly have the entire ground level exposed, and from Whittlesey Road, you look up at that and it looks like a much taller building than a 2-story
But the
building.
building
that
height is
in front.
measured from the street frontage.
Understood.
And so it's not like the developer is getting an extra story, but it's also, they didn't have to lop one off. Because it's,
But there's an aesthetic impact to the properties to the north of having a building that where the land falls away in the back, where that had, you look at a much bigger building that suddenly seems out of character with what you see from the front. I don't really care one way or the other how we define this. I'm simply pointing out that the way the zoning ordinance was written,
Yeah.
the template from our consultant, it was based on the height on all 4 sides. So I've been trying to find a way to address the concerns that shaped the ordinance, the definition in the ordinance, and be responsive to the neighbor concerns and not have unintended consequences of suddenly having, where you see a blank wall or really high. I'm sorry to use your example, Alder Hanairo, in your district, but that actually is one of the best examples I can think of. Some of those buildings are very, very, I mean, it almost would be worth, yeah, there you go. I
Yeah.
think Daphne's going there.
oh, she's gonna pull it up.
Yeah, so we don't have many places like that in the city, but we do have wherever there's topography, downtown Middleton comes to mind, and the ridge across the northern side of the city. And then, we aren't talking about specific properties per se. Oh, that's too bad. Can you do an air photo that from Whittlesey maybe? And I'm trying not to pick on any one property, but from the other side, from down here.
You mean a street view image?
Yeah, street view and then maybe from here, right here as well. Let me turn around. So then can we fly up and see it from an angle? You know what I mean?
Yeah, but that's,
Mark, I just texted you. picture from, oh yeah, well, you can see that.
I'm just trying to show, yeah, so this is what we're getting at. So here, you know, these buildings, it's hard to see, but with this angle, but it's, yeah, yeah.
Well, but
But clearly, what I'm saying, the people at the bottom see, they see a 3-story plus, maybe even 4-story building, but from the street, you see a 2-story. And it just, you know, if you imagine that in a commercial setting where you have even taller buildings and then next to houses at the bottom of the hill, it just creates a different image.
yeah, but
And-
given the steepness of this slope, the strict application of the 12-foot rule you're describing here would require each of those 5 houses I see that front right on, that back up right on that stormwater pond would have to lop off some of the back of their house.
Yeah,
And that just doesn't make sense to me either.
well, they don't have to build a 35-foot tall house on the front either. Well, I mean.
Well, that's a standard residential building height. I mean, if, you know, it's not like Terrence is gonna suddenly make 9-foot ceilings on apartments, because that's not the standard building. You're not gonna be able to squish something in there.
I would just note that I've texted you guys a picture from my backyard because this is the neighborhood I observe.
Come on.
And it's not, to me, it's,
Acceptable.
well, I mean, do I love it? No, my neighbors are probably more distressed by the view because they had a ridge at one point. I bought the house knowing what the back would look like. I mean, we live in a growing city, you know,
Yeah.
this is just what happens.
Terrence, you had a comment?
Yeah, I'm not gonna give an opinion or anything. I just want you to know. So apartments, floor height is 11 feet.
Yeah.
Office space, floor to floor height is 14 feet, so more than the 12. And retail, if you want retail on the first floor of an apartment building, retail was usually between 14, it goes 14 feet, 16 feet, or 18 feet. It's usually one of those three. Your retail is always taller on the first floor than the rest of the floors of apartment buildings. So I just want you to think about the 14 feet for office versus the 12. You know, that's all.
Yeah, so if we think of a traditional corridor 5/1 that we get, you're gonna have 14 feet of retail on the front, on the bottom floor, on the first floor, and then 11. So that's 14, 25, 36, 47. It's a lot of math.
Randy, do you have a comment? Can you hear me?
I think he's getting himself unmuted.
He's on the phone.
I don't see any people on the screen.
Okay, here I am.
Okay.
My only comment, this is a really worthwhile discussion. You know, the way, if we fix the height measurement from the street, it penalizes uphill sloping lots versus downhill sloping lots. And I think it also puts neighbors that have properties at the back lot line of those downhill facing lots in the same condition as the Terrace Avenue neighbors, you know, are arguing against. So I just, you know, that's why when we did the zoning ordinance the way we did it, I thought it was fair. It was fair for everybody. It just treated all facades equally and averaged them, with the understanding that we did increase building heights by a significant amount. I thought that the neighbors should understand kind of what they're going to be getting, and not be faced with an extra story that they just didn't anticipate.
So penalizes uphill versus down.
Mhm. But that seems to imply that it's. Hold on, never mind. Thinking my.
Mark, do you have a comment on that?
No, but I think I appreciate Commissioner Bruce speaking up because it shows you that we've been trying to come at this from different angles and trying to find the sweet spot for how to do this. And we, again, with our new zoning ordinance, we have provided much greater right to the vast majority of properties in the city to have commercial properties, I'll say, or mixed use commercial properties, to have significantly larger buildings than what they were allowed under the old code. So we've made a lot of progress for achieving the objectives of the comprehensive plan to increase density. I'll just point that out. I have a couple other comments that I'd forgotten to address. I don't know if I didn't want to get off building height if you're still discussing it.
I think we're still
No,
discussing
that's
it.
fine.
And just to respond to Commissioner Bruce's comment, it's a good one, but I just wonder, practically, how big is the penalty? Do you know what I mean? I don't think it's possible to regulate this without allowing for case by case consideration. Because what if the development, the building that's to be developed has, I mean, does this only apply if there's abutting residential districts? Like the Stagecoach doesn't have residential to the west or to the east.
This applies to all buildings.
So, yeah, we actually have step back provisions as well that we haven't even talked about. So in the mixed use, in the multifamily and mixed use sections, we have a rule that when you are abutting a single family zone district or a two family zone district, that then you're capped at a height of 36 feet. And then there's a formula for how that's calculated. So obviously the ordinance is trying to be sensitive to minimizing impacts or ameliorating impacts on residential properties surrounding the site.
And that would apply to the Castle Rock development, correct? Because to the north of that are the single family homes, is that correct?
Well, the Castle Rock development, the only reason I was bringing that up as an example is because of the topography and it has single family homes, but the zoning of that is planned unit development. So,
Right, but if it was.
right.
If it was, part of our, regular zones, that would have applied at that point as those step backs.
Yeah.
Okay.
Although the building is set back, has a pretty substantial rear setback, especially where the surface lot goes to the north. So that wouldn't have been an issue there. It's more an issue of the additional wing that they're proposing, which you'll see at a future meeting.
So the punishment is for a property owner whose slope one way or the other is greater than 45%. No. More than.
What
One of-
what I see is that for lots like the Terrace Avenue lot, where the lot slopes from street level up towards the back, that there's that type of lot would be limited to the height allowed by the code and allowed by that district, so that it could be no taller than what the district would allow. But if the lot slopes the other direction, slopes down from the street level, you are then allowed additional height, up to 12 feet of additional height. That's the inconsistency that I see.
And actually, I respectfully would disagree with that interpretation, Commissioner Bruce. The way the ordinance, the language I'm proposing says you measure height from all four sides. So using there's two parts to what you said. So the Terrace Avenue Vern site would be allowed to climb an additional 12 feet in the back, theoretically. But you couldn't climb more than 12 feet because of the 12-foot rule. So that's essentially a story. But you could step it up 1 story, but you couldn't go higher than that that's what I meant by the 12 feet.
Unless it abuts a single family residential, then it's step down.
If that language is under MUD, I don't remember off the top of my head. I don't think that's under MUD, but I can tell you in a second.
While he's
But-
looking that up, can I make a comment?
Yeah.
I just want to make it clear, I took exception to Mr. Wall's comment that it appears the code's being written to prevent a particular development. He didn't know which one. And now we're all using examples of, the Castle Rock development, the Terrace development. And I just wanted to be abundantly clear that the city does not write its zoning code to benefit or to harm any development. We're using examples because we're trying to picture in our minds the implications of what it is we're talking about. And, going back to my comment about what does it mean to be no more than 12 feet higher, the picture's worth 1,000 words. I think that needs to be illustrated in the zoning code. But I just wanted to be clear when we say things like the Terrace development or Castle Rock or, well, Stagecoach is already done, but any of the developments that are either proposed or in progress, we're only bringing it up to help us conceptualize what it is we're trying to figure out here.
Right, and the purpose is to reduce conflict and case-by-case decision-making so that
Yeah.
both neighbors know what will happen and developers know what they can do on a property. So it's supposed to be simple. Maybe not easy, but simple, so you know what is allowed. But I wonder if we're getting stuck on some of the harder cases.
Well, yeah, and so the second part to what I was going to say is, so the step up I talked about for the example of downtown, and then the example of if the lot slopes away, like the Chickahawk scenario, there the height would still be measured from all lot lines, measured left to right from each facade, each lot line, the facade facing each lot line, there'd be a left and right measurement for height. So that could result in a stepping down in the back. It could.
Would this create then, most of those houses on Chickahawk are now non-conforming structures? I mean, lawfully existing prior.
Well, again, it's on planned unit development, but if we had, single family allows a 36-foot high
Yeah.
structure. Most residences in the city are only 2 stories or 24 to 30 feet, so I can't answer that question definitively, but I think generally a 36-foot tall single family residence is a very tall residence by most standards. But yeah, the answer to that question is yes, you would have to factor that into the design where there's significant topography differences from front to back. But there are also homes that step down and then they put a
Yeah.
balcony or a rooftop patio or whatever.
And we really don't want a lot of cutting or filling. We want the established natural grade.
Chickahawk was not an example of that.
Right.
Well, and that was one of the comments emailed to us about established grade. What does established mean? When was it established?
Right.
Because could a developer change the grade and be like, well, this is what I'm considering the established grade, or does it go back to?
Well, or like a site in the Airport Road Business Park where there's been surcharge material added for 10 years and it's been sitting that way. I would argue that that's not the natural grade. That's clearly there was a grade that was, yes, there's a little bit of subjectivity, but I think a reasonable person can recognize when there's something that's been altered or not. And that's where the Plan Commission, that's where the language is that says the last part at the top of the page, if the measurements used for building height are questioned by staff, the Plan Commission will review and make a determination. So, we did try to have a process whereby others can help make that determination if necessary.
And just to also put too fine of a point on it, if you make a determination as the zoning officer or your successor when you retire, that a building is a certain height and someone is aggrieved by that, they can take it to the zoning hearing
Right.
board, right?
Yeah.
Or
Randy also
Yeah.
has grace.
Mark, I want to follow up on your comment because I want to make sure I understand. Are you saying that on a site that slopes uphill from the street, and it's a district that allows 3 stories of height, say, that the developer could build 3 stories on the street face and then 3 stories exposed on the rear face?
Yes, as long as that extra story on the back is not more than 12 feet above the facade at the front.
But that seems to contradict what we talked about earlier when I asked, can the back stick up above the front?
The answer is yes, but not more than 12 feet above it. So I'm sorry, I'm not following your question.
Did you understand my question earlier about the level roof? Like if you put a level on top of the building, that's the 12 feet I'm trying to figure out. Does it mean, and pardon me for using an example, does it mean, let's say the Terrace Avenue project went forward, the back of the building, if you were looking at it from, you know, the post office, you would see the back of the building sticking up 12 feet above the front of the building.
Potentially, you could, yeah. But that's not, we have that example all over downtown. It's just a simple step back. I mean, actually, Mr. Wall's buildings have that feature where there's a step back, you know, facing Hubbard Avenue. And then the top story is stepped
Yeah.
back. I don't know, 15
We almost
feet or
always
whatever it
step
is.
buildings back from the street, right?
Yeah,
But then we step them down if they're abutting something else.
yeah. And the East Washington corridor has the same thing in Madison where there's the upper levels have a step back. So I mean, that's not uncommon to have upper floors have a different footprint than the floor beneath them.
It's called New York City, right?
So the
Yeah, there
40,
you go ahead. That's a good example of what.
Yeah. So would the 45-degree rule apply? Is that how you would interpret what was attributed to one facade versus the, you know, the other? No, in other words, I'm just trying to figure out because like if it were 3 stories that were allowed facing the street and a site that slopes uphill, 3 stories were built on the back of it. As Alder Hanaro mentioned, that there'd be an extra story or floor that would be visible from the front of the building. How far does it need to be stepped back for that to work? I'm just not sure I understand.
So I would take the measurements of that height at every corner where there's a change in elevation. So looking at this building since it's on the screen. Actually, let's use the second one in the back with the solar panels. That's a better one. The solar panel one, I like that one better. So there's 2 heights to this building. There's the 3 stories, the 3 levels facing Hubbard in the front, where it says Journeyman, and then the 5 stories in the back. I would measure the height at the corners of where the elevation changes. So imagine if that were now a sloped site like on Terrace Avenue. I would, that corner and then and that one there, but then come forward from go from here to here. So if they're right there, I would measure that as one facade, left and right. And then the front 3 stories, I would measure that as one facade. And in the case of the Vern site, again, we're not tailoring this for any specific site. We are being responsive and using examples to what the public has commented. In fact, the developers have not, Vern's whatever the site is, have not had any conversation with them about any of this. So that's just not something that happens. So in that case, this extra 2 stories would only be 1 because of the 12-foot rule.
Right. Okay.
If you used the state building code that Terrence wants us to use, this is Is this a 5-story building or a 3-story building? Well, it's the midpoint of the,
See, I'm very comfortable with this particular example because the building does step down, or, there's a clear step down. It's not just an added floor, where, I was visualizing this, allowing for an added floor level on the back of properties. And do I have that wrong, Mark?
So, yeah, where the topography is low in the front, and let's pretend the railroad track is 25 feet higher than the front, let's pretend. You would be allowed an extra 12 feet in the back because of the 12-foot rule, but you would be able to step up the building because it's going to be very expensive to excavate that whole site into the hillside. Not to mention, not just expensive, it's just disruptive with blasting and all the things that would need to happen. So it's going to be natural for a developer to, well, I would assume it would be natural to want to step the building up and not excavate into that hill as deeply. But I mean, I don't know. That's not what I'm trying to address with the zoning code. We're trying to address the appearance to the adjoining properties and overall design.
So on properties that such as the Castle Rock property, for example, would the height at the back of the building be limited to the zoning district height, or would it be the zoning district height? Oh, okay.
Yeah, so using Castle Rock, if that were a clean slate, and they wanted to develop the entire site to the setback lines, and if the site to the north is, 20 feet lower, they would have to step the building. They would either have to start with a lower height in the front, other than the allowed 60 feet, or if they were 60 feet in the front, they would have to then have the back wing of the building or something similar to what Middleton Center is designed to, except in reverse.
Yeah.
You have to step it down so that
Right.
you see the 60-foot height on the north facade in that case.
Okay.
I'm
Wait,
sorry,
is
to me
that
it's very
right?
clear, but I haven't just explained it very well.
is that right? The height of the facade facing the front lot line, I'm reading what's in teal here.
Yeah.
May not exceed the maximum height allowed by the zoning district in which the site is located. So nothing about the building height at the rear line other than the 12 feet above the
It
front
does,
facade.
it does say building height shall be determined separately for each facade facing a lot line.
But only the front lot line is constrained for the maximum height of the zoning ordinance. The rear lot line would be maximum height plus 12. Theoretically.
I can work with the attorney to revise this further. I can see how there's a little bit of ambiguity potentially still. It's in my head, it's not ambiguous, but I can see how it's hard to understand what's in my head sometimes. So welcome
No
to
truer words were
welcome,
spoken.
welcome to my world.
But yeah, I mean, just going back again, there's no proposal for Terrace Avenue, but looking at the one that this plan commission considered a year ago, it sounds to me like they could have proposed a design that would have added 12 feet to the back of the building.
Yeah, because it steps up the hillside. But keep in mind, there's also a rear setback requirement, and the lots there are it's not all one development
It's
site
pretty
necessarily.
not,
But
they're
then
not
that
very
makes
deep.
it seem like a 6-story building instead of a 5-story.
But it wouldn't seem that way from the front, and it wouldn't seem that way from the side because you're going up the hillside.
Actually, it would seem that way from the front. I mean, not if you were standing like right next to it, but if you were standing further away, you would see that 6th story on top
And from the side.
and from the side.
But it would have to be stepped back such that where that extra height happens, that left and right measurement couldn't be higher as an average than the 60-foot height limit. I'm gonna have to make a drawing and depict this, but it's you're still gonna measure,
But people don't see averages. People see that.
I know what you
that
mean.
Chunk that's gonna be the sixth story and the elevator is gonna say the sixth floor, right? It's, so that's, we talked about wanting to provide certainty or, at least some sense of what our standards are and what neighbors can expect. And I feel like what we're talking about now, by allowing that extra height in the back for these sloped lots, it just doesn't, it's not sitting well with me. Maybe if I see some illustrations, it will.
I guess we'd want to see 3 illustrations where the lot slopes down from the street, where the lot slopes up from the street, and where the lot slopes left to right or right to left along the front street, the University Avenue issue.
right?
Because we have some long, narrow lots. We have some fat and short lots that are not very deep. Like a lot of those ones along University Avenue, the building facade's going to be wide because it's not a very deep lot.
Yeah, and I mean, to
I
some
was-
extent.
High school
I-
geometry all over.
Well, to some
I-
extent, I kind of feel like if it's, if you have bought a lot and it slopes down, you're gonna get the advantage. If you buy a lot and it slopes up, you bought a lot that slopes up, so you're gonna be penalized in a sense. It's just like if you didn't buy a lakefront lot, you're penalized. You're not gonna have a lake view, right? That's the lot you bought. So to some
But-
extent, I don't.
But if you
I'm-
bought a lot that slopes up, this might create a financial incentive that you have to blast or cut that lot so that you get your full story. And I would rather add that extra building and keep the hill intact. Add that extra half a story, meaning a full story, but on half of the building.
That wasn't what was, I mean, I guess, so you're saying, and again, going back to the hypothetical example, a different design would have stepped it up and built without any blasting or.
I will provide the drawings. I'm happy to do that. I wish I had done it for this meeting in hindsight. I'm happy to do that. That's a good suggestion, and I've got it all in my head right now, and I just have to extract it from there, put it on
Yeah.
paper.
Well, we've reached new heights then.
It's a tall order.
Go ahead, Randy.
Yeah, Lisa, that's your comment about providing some clarity and certainty for neighbors is what my initial issue was. And it's not just, it's not just a matter of the developer buying one lot versus the other. Yes, the developer can look at the code and understand what's available to them, but it's really what I was more concerned about was the neighbors and what their expectations are. I mean, they're there. They don't have control. And so I think it just needs to be clear and understandable for them as well.
We could go back to doing everything by PUD.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, that was a joke. Just-
Yeah.
I don't know, I think those meetings were short. weren't they?
Daphne's actually found something similar to what already was in my head, so. Although this is a little more complicated, but the idea of a stepping, what I would do is measure the midpoint of, between these boxes, these, well, it's not, that doesn't show exactly what I had in my head, I guess.
Yeah,
But it's.
because that's in meters. You had feet in.
Right now I feel defeated.
So can I make a motion that do we need a formal motion to ask Mark, or just, we understand that,
We don't need a form.
okay, we don't need
I
a motion.
understand the assignment.
You understand the assignment? We're not gonna recommend passage today anyway, so
Right.
So there would have to be some amendment to that. All right.
Any
Can
other
we,
comments?
If we haven't beat, building height to death, this doesn't relate to how is it measured. I'm just curious about 10.02.23. I'm trying to figure out why, so the SR and TR are limited to 35 feet
wait, where are we?
for the principal building height. Just pick any of the.
10.02.
Yeah.
She's going there, right, the medium, MR.
No, go back up a little bit, because I want to get to, my question simply is, at some point, and maybe I should pull it up on my own screen, we jump from, see that 35 feet for the TRF, scroll down to the first multifamily. This goes up to 36 feet. And then we've got a required setback for a building that's, for example, 37 feet tall next to a building that's 35 feet tall. Do you know what I mean?
I don't know where the
So in
30,
this example, let me pull it up on.
I don't remember the number 37 anywhere in the zone.
No, I'm making that up as an
Oh, okay.
example. It's one of the options for, let me find it. We've got so many different changes here. I show this on page, no, I don't. I just have 10 to 23.
So MRM.
Okay. Let's keep scrolling. Keep going. I want to see the footnote. The step back. See the step back required per footnote for building height over 36 feet. So if you had, I'm looking at the asterisk number 1. If you had a building in this district that is 37 feet tall and it's next to any of the SRs or the TR or the TF, it is literally 2 feet taller than those buildings. Why would we then require the step back?
Well, first of all, this would be at the rear setback line, and the rear setback line is obviously not at the lot line, so it's 30 feet in this case. So if the building were set in away from, let's say if the rear setback was 31 or 32 feet, there wouldn't be a step back requirement.
Does this SRM, or let's say, does a single family home have to step back from another single
No.
family home?
No, but they're capped at, so are you wishing the 35 and 36 were the same measurement? Is that what you're getting at?
I'm just wondering, why would we have such a requirement? Again, thinking about the neighbors, it seems like we're trying to keep something that's not in character with the neighborhood from being built right next door. So if you had a 37-foot building next to a 35-foot building, what's wrong with that?
There's nothing wrong with that, which is why we have the step back requirement. But if it's a 48-foot building, that's where the step back kicks
Then
in.
maybe my objection is shall not exceed 36 feet. It seems like there's such a small difference between what's happening in the single or
Yeah,
twin
in
home.
hindsight, I guess, in fact, my memory was that we allowed 36 feet with a single family now, and apparently we just kept the 35 from the old code. So that's a 1 foot difference, which is, I,
1 foot.
it's a third of a meter. So, yeah, not quite.
Do any other
We're
commissioners?
inching along here, but
We'll get through
on
this
the-
a lot faster without the fines.
yeah, on this same issue.
Well, I'm just wondering, am I the only one who feels this way? That,
Well, this isn't a change that we identified in this round of changes, and if we were to change the single family and 2-family height from 35 to 36 feet to have consistency, I certainly wouldn't have a problem with that, but I think that would trigger another hearing.
I think the
Yes.
building height interpretation or changes that came out today would require another hearing.
I don't agree with that.
It's different from the published version.
But we are proposing changes to the building height definition. And everyone knows that we're tinkering with that and we've gotten feedback. If it's something radically different, then yeah, but I think from my talking with the city attorney, I'm comfortable with, I mean, the whole point of a public hearing is to get feedback on the proposed changes. And there's an awareness in the public that you're discussing building height definitions and changing it.
And there's an awareness that we're discussing the step back requirements because it's.
Right.
as
Well, I mean,
amended.
I'm not, you know, I'm happy to talk with, I almost said Larry, with Matt about that, but I think at some point a hearing is not just meant to be I mean, ideally you have a hearing and everyone's happy with it, but that doesn't always happen. So,
Well, I think Alder Hanero is saying if we change step back, how this is measured, that would also be, similar to how we're changing building height.
right.
Right.
Meaning we could make the change is what she's saying. Oh,
And
okay.
I'm not comfortable giving ourselves, I'm not comfortable acting as if we don't want to hold a second hearing. I think we need to have that as an option if that's where our discussion takes us. I do not want to start the discussion as if we're reluctant to have a second hearing.
Understood. But there's going to be additional changes. We've already identified a couple more that that are, hopefully everything is minor from here on out. But no, I mean, we're aware that it's not uncommon for ordinances like this to require some tinkering for a couple of years. I mean, that's not uncommon. Wausau and
Yeah.
The other communities that have this template did the same thing.
And you just present the facts to the city attorney, and if he says you need another hearing, you need another hearing.
we
If
do,
he says
yeah.
you don't, then you don't.
Yeah, but then it'll be my successor that finishes
I
that.
see Randy has his hand up. Randy, go ahead.
Trusted.
Oh, you're muted.
You're on
Randy.
mute.
Randy, we don't hear you.
You're on mute, Randy.
Okay, thank you. While we're talking about building heights, I wanted just to ask, we're giving this 6-foot allowance for pitched roofs. And, I think in some ways that makes some sense, but it's, the 612 pitch is somewhat arbitrary. What I was wondering is, could we just increase our building heights by 6 feet and leave it at that? Flat roofs right now have you're allowed a 5-foot parapet. Maybe we would just not allow any additional encroachments on flat roof buildings and just give all buildings another 6 feet of height. And that way it wouldn't be quite so arbitrary that someone that came in with a 5-pitch roof, for instance, or 5.5 pitch roof versus a 6-pitch roof wouldn't be penalized. I'm just wondering if you thought about that at all, or if that makes any sense to you.
My response to that is that, yeah, then we're going to have a builder come in and have a flat roof that's 6 feet higher. And then we're going to have the same debate over again.
But 6 feet higher in a commercial building is not a story, so it's not usable space. Unless
Well,
they
but
just make
But if there's different heights for different, I mean, not every apartment floor to ceiling height is 9 feet. Some are 10, some might be 11.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't
Okay.
know. I just feel like you have to pick a standard and, the reason I thought this was a good compromise was because, we have, comparing Stagecoach with other projects that are flat roofs, obviously there's a very different design, a very different aesthetic that results. And I'm not saying flat roofs are bad, and I'm not saying pitched roofs are bad. I think we're just trying to say, look, if you have a flat roof that has a more industrial feel to it. And maybe there's some settings where it makes more sense to have a pitched roof.
Yeah.
Don't want to penalize that.
I-
So
I don't disagree with that. I think you're right. There are certainly some designs that would look better if it was pitched roof versus a flat roof. So yeah, I just was coming at it from a different angle. Are we allowed to, is the plan commission allowed to give additional height if the design warrants it?
No,
I
because
would
it's not a design standard.
Right,
It's a-
exactly.
It's a specification in the ordinance, so you'd have
Yeah.
to get a variance. In this case, it'd be self-created hardship, so.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
this is an example where if you think the 612 measurement isn't fair, or if you think that's not the right measurement and you think 512 is better or 812, that's an example of where I feel, in my opinion, that you could propose a change and we could have the city attorney weigh in on whether that needs another hearing. But I think if it's something that's within reason, close to what we noticed, and we're just tinkering with it, in my view, that doesn't require another hearing. But as Alder Hanero said, maybe it's good to just have another hearing once all the changes are made.
If Randy's done, I'd like to pitch something about this section.
Pitch. Come
One,
on.
Welcome
The-
to the club.
The 10, okay, so this paragraph 2, it's two different things. I mean, this whole section is exceptions to maximum height regulation. So I think paragraph 2 should be split into 2 paragraphs. It should be additional height for roof design, and then another one, additional height for non-residential space on the ground level. It doesn't make sense to me to bundle those two together because they are two distinct things. And then I'm also in this section, I guess it is this one. Wait, don't go too far.
While you're looking, if I may just say, the reason why they're in one paragraph is because it's one or the other. It's not, they're not, it's meant to be you get one, but you don't get both.
I agree, but
Okay.
I think that can still be stated. I think that can still be stated in better in 2 paragraphs. It's just, they're such distinct things that, I mean, since you can't have them both, it just doesn't make sense to me to package them together. Let me find the other one. There's a reference, oh no, it's continuing on. Right there. So this is the additional height, which we previously had agreed to for the affordable housing and net zero building. As long as it incorporates one or more height exceptions and meets all other requirements of Articles 2 and 3, meets the minimum and maximum parking standards in section 10.6.6. My concern there is meeting the minimum parking standards because we built into the code an opportunity for a developer to request a reduction or elimination of that minimum. And I don't know if that is something that would be meeting the minimum standard. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I don't want to reach a situation where somebody's asking for something and
Yeah, and
We don't,
they,
right, we don't need to have every section repeat reference to every other section that also has to be complied with. Because then it boxes us in, so we can't do a waiver on one section without waiving the other section.
that's an even
well,
better.
the waivers are only pertaining to which, Article 7, which this is not.
No, they can waive the minimum number of parking requirements.
Oh, well, if there's, we're dealing with section, okay, I see your,
Well,
I see
then,
your point.
yeah, I
see
would
your
say
point.
take out the reference
Yeah.
to the parking standards because I can see the
Yeah, just
airport height limit
meets all of the
overlay.
requirements.
So just to be clear, and I'm trying to find exactly where the language is, this is simply relocated from 3 other sections of the ordinance. I consolidated
Oh.
it into one section. This is not, this should not be new language.
But she's talking about this, the minimum maximum parking standards, that was added.
Let me just read, sorry, just a second. I didn't think I had added anything here. But yeah, it's underlined, so that would suggest it was maybe added. If that's the case, I misspoke. I don't know. I came from that.
I like Commissioner Paulson's observation. I would just take out that
Yeah.
third part of the.
Take out that
I,
clause.
at the moment, I don't see where that came from, so I apologize if I made a
Yep.
mess of something
Just eliminate that clause.
outside of the airport height.
And
limitation.
then if we could scroll down to page 180.
Oh, yeah, it isn't here. It was just, it was found under all three of the sections. So that's.
Even so, I think it's unnecessary.
Well, anything else we need to hash out?
Well, I have a couple
right.
more.
My list is only 17 long. Just kidding.
Yeah, I know.
No, go ahead, Lisa.
I used letters, so I've lost track. So the title of 10-4-34. Gotta go back up a little. There, wait, is that it? Keep going. It's the setback, the side yard infill. Keep going down. Nope.
Yeah, keep going.
Down. Down,
Here
up,
it
down, up.
comes. Wait, where'd it go? Yeah, there it is. C. I don't know why we titled it this way, because it really should be consistent with B, which is rear yard adjustments for small lots. This should be rear yard adjustments or setback for lakeshore lot, because that's what this paragraph is about. So that should change. And then I think that part in red underlined isn't a sentence, or no, it is. That's a different comment I have. I wonder if we need to specify shall have a minimum rear setback of 8 feet from the ordinary high water mark. I think it's always important to give a reference point.
Okay. Yeah,
Yes.
I felt it was implied, but I can see how that's clear. The reason why, I can't remember if I put that in this, in the spreadsheet that was so hard to read, but the reason there is that technically it's a 3 foot measurement. That's right. Yeah, so technically what we found is that this would have resulted based on the standard in other districts, a 3 foot setback, and we felt that was too close to the water.
But
Well,
I
you-
think changing the title of the section is also important because it's very specific.
So increase of rear yard setback for lakeshore lots is what you're.
I would
Or
just
rear-
make it
okay.
consistent with that, rear
Got it.
yard adjustments or setbacks for lakeshore
I see your
lots.
point, yeah. And now that's an example of a change that would not necessitate a new hearing, just to be clear. Because it's just to add clarity, it doesn't change someone's rights.
And Mark, can you double check that the Dane County shoreland zoning would allow a patio or deck to be that close to the ordinary high water mark?
We don't have that standard. We don't apply that standard in the city of Middleton for these type of lots.
It's only for the structure, not for the decks.
I will
and-
double check,
Yeah.
but I'll double check.
I have more comments. I think I can get through them fairly quickly. Okay, going back to section 10-328, 1H. The memo said, neither fees in lieu of parkland nor park improvement fees shall be charged for a permit to construct an accessory dwelling unit. Does this reflect desired city policy? I would say yes, we want to increase housing without.
I would say yes.
Yeah.
You say yes?
Agree.
Even the Parks Commission says yes.
Yes. Okay, that's good to know. Thank you.
And then 10
Speaking ex.
10-56. Can that be right? That sounds like a large number. Yes, it is. Do we define public utilities anywhere, either small scale or large scale? I looked and
They are probably, the definition would, well,
And I'm
Uh,
asking because there's another change that, 10-256 is where this established utility transportation right of way zoning district is added. And that seems to be to provide an alternative for zoning stormwater management ponds. And my comment, in my notes was, so stormwater is included as a utility, and then when I looked for a definition of utilities, I did not find.
so the land uses that you see listed on the screen, each of those, virtually all of these, there's one exception, like, and that's letter F. But all these others, A, B, C, D, E, and then you'll see that in other sections, those terms are land use categories that are defined in Article 3. So each of those has a definition. Yeah, there you go. Thank you.
Thank you.
And so the word in the fourth line, there's stormwater detention or conveyance, which is what I hung my hat on when we had the Ziegler Farm go to a CUP.
Okay.
And just for everyone else's benefit, because Alder Hanero and I actually discussed this a few months ago, there was at one point last year a suggestion or a request to move these definitions all to Article 1 at the beginning. And as I started doing that, it was gutting the definitions from this section where it seemed like it was the best place to keep them. It just became, it was going to become a very unwieldy effort, and I felt it made the ordinance less user-friendly. So with Alder Hanero's consent, we simply defined ADU at the front and kept the definitions for land use categories here. But her question points to the fact that maybe that's why the definitions having them in two places is problematic. But fortunately, there's a search, you can do a search on it.
Mhm. Okay. And then page 206, again, there's a 12-page difference between the packet and the code.
That number 12 again.
So my question is, well, I'm gonna guess it's 206 of the code. My question simply is, should legal be in the title of this section like the others? So it is actually.
Legal non-conforming use.
It's the structures, 10-5-30. And I'm showing it on page 206 of the packet.
Should legal be in the title? Okay.
So, yeah, so the changes in previous sections is to add legal non-conforming lots, legal non-conforming uses, and my question simply is, should this be legal non-conforming structures? Consistent with.
Oh,
the
I see. Okay.
previous
Oh, I see your point. Okay. Yeah, that'd be fine.
Then page 219, again, of the packet of the PDF. There's a reference to no, maybe it's not 219 of the packet. Maybe it's 219 of the code. It is. It's 9B, paragraph 9B on page 231 of the packet. Paragraph 9. Go. It's the limitations on uses for all off-street parking areas.
This is a section, by the way, this article that when we got the template originally, I asked our consultant to clean it up to have better categories, and it still needs to be overhauled, in my opinion, but that's for another time.
Yeah, on mine, it's section 1066, and it is showing as page 231 of the packet.
Well, I think
And I'm not
when
seeing
you
the
redid
packet.
the packet,
Oh,
the
okay.
numbers might have.
That's probably it. anyway, it's limitations on uses of all off-street parking areas, paragraph 9B. And it says, under no circumstances shall any vehicle or equipment be used as living quarters except in approved campground land uses. And my question simply is, thinking about, I know it's not our zoning code's job, but is it illegal for someone to sleep in their car?
Currently, yes.
Currently, yes.
I think I added, there might be one minor change in this section, if I remember right. There it is. That was one of the last changes they made.
Yeah, that's what
Karen.
made me think of it, because I saw this, obviously trying to keep RVs that are parked from being used for human occupation, and it just made me think about what do we have in our code that might not be very compassionate.
Yeah.
But again, it's not the zoning code's job to take care of it.
Yes, I wouldn't think so.
Yeah. And then
There's,
10,
don't we
I'm
have a
sorry,
standard code for like public
It's vagrancy.
vagrant and disorder? I mean, no, so the issue, it's not actually just an academic issue. So this is happening around the country where you have things like Walmart or other churches which wanting to assist people who are experiencing homelessness will allow parking of recreational vehicles in their parking lot. But a recreational vehicle is not a dwelling unit, right? And so then you run into these zoning definition codes, and some cities and states go too far one way or the other. But I think this is just trying to say you can't really park an RV somewhere and let someone live there if it's not allowed in the zoning ordinance. Because an RV is not a dwelling unit, even though you could dwell there.
well, but.
I know way too much about this hyper-technical
Yeah.
concept.
Well, and earlier, the paragraph B that I mentioned says, under no circumstances shall any vehicle or equipment be used as living quarters except in approved campground land uses.
Mhm.
So in your example, the city could carve out an exception for churches or whatever if we wanted
Right.
to, but we're not doing that now.
Or, if you had language like this that was facially neutral and a church wanted to park some RVs for homeless, would it be a First Amendment issue or would it be a kind of zoning facial issue? That's
Like Madison's
way above my
having-
pay grade.
Madison's having a problem with that right now, just about a block away from me. And they've got a guy hauling a trailer that he's built and he sleeps in it at night, but he parks it in front of people's homes.
Mm.
Alternates parking as he needs to. And they can't get rid of him. They can't do anything because they don't have the right codes in place evidently.
All right, well, that may be something.
Well,
Let's
For a bigger
explore that
discussion,
further.
yeah. Page, sorry, Daphne, page 235, 10-643.
I'm sorry.
My question is, why isn't utility access standards in the building code? Like, why are we inserting this into the zoning code? I guess, is it a design issue rather than a safety issue? And why only in residential uses, not in commercial?
So the origin for this was a fairly recent, this is language that came up a few weeks ago with our building inspector working with the city attorney. Without getting into details of projects, we have had questions about ADUs that, and duplexes where they're not being properly designed.
Mhm.
And so our building inspector convinced our city attorney to say it'd be good to have some of this language in the zoning ordinance because it just provides more notice up front to people as they consider their uses of their property, what the requirements are. So that's as good a summary as I can give. So our attorney was amenable to this. In fact, this language none of this is mine. This came from the city attorney working with the building inspector to try and make the building inspector's job easier in working with, and for that matter, to make builders, give clear expectations to builders and homeowners.
So does this duplicate in any way what's in our building code?
I would guess that the answer is to some degree, yes, but what are you saying?
I
No?
was saying
you were
no,
not?
because,
Oh.
from speaking with Jim, I believe the issue is mostly with people who, like, if they rent out the second unit in their duplex or an ADU, but the renter doesn't have access to the shut-off
Sure.
controls
Right.
specifically.
Yeah.
And so in the building code, it kind of just ends at, from the outside of the building, it doesn't really address the
Oh, I see
interior
what you're saying.
part of, you know, like the shut-off controls on that end. And so that's why he thought it was necessary to include it in here.
Yeah, I'm
Okay,
just
so this,
wondering.
this is gonna be a much bigger issue with the PSC, and so there's a draft legislation at the state level that would prohibit municipalities from requiring additional or separate laterals or connections for utilities for accessory dwelling units. But what Daphne's referencing is if I'm renting a unit to a tenant under the PSC, they have to have, I can't separately bill them for electric and gas unless they have a way to control their use, which means
Sure.
some sort of shut-off valve. So this raises that complicated issue that if you're renting out an ADU, you are a landlord, you're subject to landlord-tenant law. You don't want to have to cut a separate electric and gas line, which means it comes off the main house. You're not going to sub-meter it, so you have to charge them something that's fair. You can't charge someone for use unless they have the ability to control the use. So it's,
No, I get,
yeah,
I get why this is added. I was actually at the meeting when this came up. But my question simply is, going back to what the purpose of the zoning code is and what the purpose of this specific addition is this related to
Yeah.
safety or to design? Because if it's a safety thing, and it
Mhm.
kind of seems like it's a safety thing, it should be in our building code, and this section should just say, paragraph 1, refer to the building code, which is what we do for the sign code. And, you know, there are other places in this zoning code where we don't repeat what's in the other ordinance. We just say, go see that ordinance. So
But we-
that's my question. And then the other part of it is, why is this only a residential thing? Or if it's a safety issue, is there also a need to make sure that access to shut-off controls are?
right, we do require that a duplex, if it's a twin home with a 0 lot line requires each home requires its own lateral.
Right.
But a duplex on one parcel, does that require 1 lateral or 2? Our ordinance specifies this other places, right? I mean,
So-
we're also talking that to force someone to buy a sewer lateral is like $20,000 to $30,000. So that's,
I would think they should be able to branch off electrical line and
right.
gas line.
You should be able to,
Because they're gonna have
if
their
the
own
utility
meter.
allows it, right? But you need your own meter.
Right.
But I don't think we should regulate it anything more than what the PSC requires.
Sure.
And the building inspector doesn't actually care who has the meter. They have to make sure that there's adequate and safe.
Right.
So each duplex shall provide a separate public water lateral.
And this
But
is,
that's a duplex if it's 2 units on one parcel.
yeah, 2 units on 1 lot, but I believe this is the same that we have for twin homes as well, which are attached units on separate lots.
Yes.
This comes up a lot. We have, you know, several times a year, I would say, we field between the 3 of us inquiries about people who want to separate their duplexes.
They want to do
Separate
a 0
ownership.
lot line
Yeah.
split.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But there's already they already have 2 laterals and not 1.
No, not individual laterals running to the street. I can't think of an example where we've come across that in the city where that exists.
But our ordinance says a duplex needs 2 separate laterals.
After constructed following the adoption of this ordinance is how it currently reads.
Oh, so most of the duplexes were built probably in the 70s,
Mhm.
80s.
Yeah.
I'm with Lisa. I think adding it to the zoning ordinance, I should have seen it. That seems unusual to me.
Yeah, and I get that, you know, perhaps there's a need for builders to be aware of this requirement. But is that what our zoning code is for? Or do we have another mechanism we can use to make sure that upfront they're aware?
So Matt Fleming also had some hesitation about this. So I asked that he directly work with Jim Schollander to hear Jim out. This was the result.
But I think
So-
it should be in our just general municipal sanitation or public order ordinances, not in the zoning ordinance.
I agree. That's why.
In the whole state preemption on the building code, I'm not even sure. I'm not sure that we're allowed to regulate that by zoning, right? Zoning regulates the use and height of buildings and structures and land. And then the state building and sanitation codes regulates, and the PSC regulate utilities.
So we could just strike this from. It's certainly anything that we've added to the code or proposed to add, you can strike. And there's, that's within the confines of, I mean, it's within the bounds of what you could do here.
Mhm.
So if you're asking this to be stricken, it's an issue that just doesn't change anything from current practice. So if that's something you want to add, and if.
With a
And like-
reference, I think we
Right.
can strike it with a reference to where builders can get the information they need to avoid a situation like what recently came up to prompt this.
Okay.
I mean, unless Jim can provide us some compelling reason. I don't know of any other city that does this. I've not seen it.
Okay.
Doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's just.
I think Jim is trying to be responsive to people who go down a certain path and then discover that they're not building everything the way they should have.
Sure,
Well,
and I get that,
yeah.
and that's laudable, but I don't think the zoning code, I don't think a 300+ page zoning code, having the section in there is going to necessarily make it stand out. I think
Okay.
a handout. So you've decided to build in Middleton,
Yeah.
here's something. I mean, it to me, it makes sense to gather these recent lessons learned. Here are things
Yeah.
that come up and be aware.
I mean, yeah, this is an issue in ADUs in Madison.
Mhm.
And so they have a whole webpage and they talk about utilities specifically on their webpage.
Yeah.
Which is something we
Yeah.
can do. Yeah.
But is theirs in their zoning code, is the utility piece in their zoning code,
Not
or
that
is
I
it just in
could
their building
find.
code?
But yeah, it wasn't
Yeah.
in the zoning.
And I'd make an assumption that, a builder, I mean, if it's an individual homeowner wanting to add a unit, I would hope that they would be contacting the city and figure out, okay, I want to do this. What are my steps? What do I need to know?
Mhm.
And then they'd be referenced to, well, you have to make sure you follow our zoning code and follow our, building codes, and the inspection process and the permitting process, and would kind of flush all that out. If you're more of a developer, I'm hoping they are referencing these documents just naturally, because that's what they have to do. So I don't see it necessarily being a zoning issue.
Right, and the contractor should know.
Yeah.
Right. I like how you said flush it out for laterals. I didn't know if you knew that. But I think the utility is actually MG&E. I think it requires a separate meter. Because if you read this right now, it says all dwelling units in separate ownership. So that would not be an ADU.
Right.
That would not be a duplex unless you make it a 0 lot line, because a duplex has to be one parcel, so it has to be one ownership.
Okay, so it sounds like we kind of agree on
Yeah.
it not being a zoning thing.
Mhm.
Page 265, which is actually section 10.8.20 about the landscape plan. I think this is the
Yep.
paragraph 6. So the thing that's added is not a sentence. So I don't know what we need to do with that. That text for trees, or no, a tree preservation plan. That's not a sentence. And then I'm wondering, the designation of all trees and shrubs to be saved and or removed. I get why and or is problematic, but it seems to me that the public, the neighbors care much more about the trees that are going to be removed. So I'm thinking those should stay in, that those should be designated.
So you want to delete the removal of removed?
Yes.
Removed.
I think,
And
so
you
I think the
probably have
last
to
sentence,
say all the trees and shrubs to be saved and those to be removed, you know, to make it abundantly clear. But that's, to me, my experience is it's the trees that are going to be removed that really get people's attention.
and so you're probably the last sentence, a tree preservation plan must be prepared by certified arborist.
I don't know if
So it's a requirement that you prepare a plan, or that if you prepare a plan, it must be a certified arborist?
Yeah, that
Which,
just
the
needs to be
second.
changed to make sense.
I had worked with Kevin on this language. Maybe I missed copying something over. I'll double check that.
Okay.
That is
And then page 274, the buffer yard opacity. The question simply is, I think we're separating out, there it is. So Parks and Rec Conservancy, buffer yards next to those lands should have 0 opacity. But that's not the case around Pheasant Branch Conservancy right now, correct? Like if somebody were to build now next to the Conservancy, we shouldn't be able to see into their yards. Or should we?
if someone were to build,
What does it mean to have a 0 opacity buffer yard?
That would just mean they aren't required to have, fencing or anything. So it would be like, 2 single family homes have a 0 buffer yard. So, they could have a fence or, they could have landscaping, but they also can just have an open backyard, from one house to another. So in this case, yeah, the from a single family home to a conservancy, they don't necessarily need to have any, screening or anything between that.
So the Conservancy then is completely exposed. Their yard is,
Which is
okay.
What we have now.
situation right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's why you get a lot of encroachment into the Conservancy.
Into the Conservancy, that's,
Yes.
well, and that's something that I guess we don't need to address now, but it seems like it might be something, especially as the city
don't-
grows.
It's
Yeah.
something that's not allowed. I mean, there's laws now that protect that
Yeah.
if you want to go out and actually police it, but.
Yeah, well,
Doesn't get police
this
much.
came up for the Pheasant Crossing,
Right,
yeah.
exactly.
Okay, moving on, paragraph, or page 300. This one just seems like an editing issue. My question is, what does paragraph D keep or delete and renumber? There's a big chunk where stuff is coming out. Let me find the reference. Okay, so it's paragraph 9, conditions.
are you under zoning?
I am under 10-10-32, conditional use permit
Conditional use permit.
procedures. And it's paragraph 9, conditions. Okay, so.
Oh, yeah.
So see how D is shown as added, but then it's all straight
That's a,
through?
yeah, I understand.
So should that blue paragraph be not strike through?
There were 2 different, so I was working on this and our city attorney worked on this, and that's why we ended up with different colors, and I
Okay.
don't know how to deal with some of this stuff. I tried to clean this up as much as I could, and I missed this one. The background here is that there were several, the way this is written at the very top, it says, at a minimum, the plan commission shall impose the following conditions. This again is template language from our consultant. It's some of these conditions just don't apply in all circumstances or even in many circumstances. So it just, we wanted to strike those. It just didn't make sense to have those. D is stricken. We're proposing it be stricken because Matt Fleming was concerned about the zoning administrator having the authority to enter the premises. So he suggested striking that. I think I was the one who got rid of the green. I don't remember which way it is, but the point is it's all supposed to
Okay,
be stricken.
so that's supposed to be stricken,
Yeah.
and then other conditions, paragraph, which is paragraph E right now, that will change to paragraph D.
Correct, yeah.
Got it.
Sorry about that. Thank you.
Nope, that's fine. And then my last comment is just simply to check for when should is used, when it actually should be must. I don't,
Shall.
yeah, or shall.
Where is that specifically?
Uh, it's in here somewhere.
Do a word search.
Yeah, I mean, in many cases, it's a reference to digital files should be submitted. That's the most consistent use.
Yeah.
Um,
So when Larry Fleming looked at this originally, we tried to address all the shoulds, shalls, and musts. The shoulds that remain are probably intentional. Are you asking that? There's apparently 33
so
references to them.
well, there's a new reference. This is also the landscaping plan. And it says seed mixes and maintenance practices should be consistent with recommendations made by qualified landscape architects or natural resource professionals such as those from DNR, blah, blah, blah. And it just struck me as, is that a case where it
Okay, make that a shall.
should be stronger?
I have no problem with that.
You should change that.
Well, I resisted saying that.
Too easy, sorry.
A little punch happy.
Yeah, we're getting,
So that's in 10.03. Okay.
yeah.
Any other comments?
I did want to follow up on Ginny Corwin's comment about manufactured homes. I think her comment may have been lumping together the manufactured
Yeah.
homes individually and the districts.
Yeah.
But then my question was, why were the district requirements changed and which MR density level are they based on?
So this is the thing that I said at the beginning, I was going to address Jenny's comments and I hadn't gotten to, so I'm glad you got back to it. So this language all came from the Wisconsin Housing Alliance review. We added manufactured homes to many of the zoning districts. The standards for MHD are also, trying to remember if those came from Housing Alliance. Do you remember off the top of my head? I can pull that up quickly. It's been so long since this change was made. I don't remember what the source was other than I presume. Well, I'll look.
Do we have any MHDs
No.
mapped parcels?
No.
That's the thing is, I mean, I think we will get, you could imagine manufactured housing in
Right.
some places, but probably not in a park or a district.
So Alder Hanero, you're asking what these standards are based on, and I will get you an answer.
Yeah, okay, yeah, because I mean, it makes, one of her comments was about impervious surfaces.
Right.
And the 70% does line up with some of our multifamily districts, but the 5,000 square feet minimum lot area does not. So I was just wondering, what is this based on?
Mr. Chair, I
Yeah.
think Randy has a
I-
question.
I was just gonna say that. Randy, go ahead.
Yeah, when we're talking about the manufactured homes, the one comment that I wanted to make sure that we discussed or understood was it allows for manufactured homes without permanent foundations, and I in all districts, and I wanted to make sure that was intentional, that wasn't just something that was suggested by the Manufactured Home Council. To me, I would think that we'd want to have permanent foundations.
Mark?
I don't know about the foundation question. I will look at that, but I found the dimensions issue that was feedback they provided. So you're asking about foundations. I think we do have a foundation requirement in our code. Do a quick search for that. Or do you take the word foundation?
I think what Randy is referencing is in the definitions of manufactured home. And it says dwelling with or without a permanent foundation.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And that, I believe, is federal.
I think that's the
definition?
federal
Yeah,
code,
that's a
yeah.
federal. And so I think elsewhere in our code, we would require, can you do, I mean, I don't know how often the word foundation appears, but.
I don't think you can require, I don't think you can require. I mean, what this is basically saying is a dwelling unit that meets the manufactured housing code from HUD can be used in the same area that a single family stick-built home would be. And that's the purpose of the amendment, is to treat those fair.
Let's scroll up. Oh. Go back to Article 3 in the beginning of it. Let's just scroll to the front of it, applying to all uses. It's probably like, a little before that. Oh, before the table, yeah. A little more. So there's a section in Article 3 that is, keep going. It pertains, regulations pertaining to all land uses. So, that would be the answer in there in terms of what we require. I agree with what Daphne said, that the definition came from the federal level. Maybe we don't have that requirement. I thought we had something in here about that, but.
Maybe track that one down. And then just thinking ahead, so our next meeting or a future meeting, we'll come back to take action on this. I'm wondering, the comment that we heard earlier, and we received a comment in writing about the research park and indoor sales. Can we put that as an item for discussion next time?
We could. We can do that. If you wish to discuss that, we can discuss that. I guess I would encourage the commission to consider when you're ready to cut off the first round of changes and defer something to a second round. Because otherwise, as was once said to me, and Abby will remember this too, it was once said to me, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. So.
Mark's gonna retire sometime and he wants to get at least one version done.
Well, I got one version done. So that advice is good advice. It stuck with me. I mean, at some point we could keep you as a commission, because I will be gone. We'll keep discussing this, and that's your prerogative, and that's fine. But in the meantime, the planning and zoning city planner and zoning administrator is tasked with interpreting and applying the zoning ordinance, and is trying to deal with issues that have surfaced over the last year.
Let me ask this, would there be a reason not to allow sales in these areas?
I think the concern that I would have, and I think my colleagues would have this as well, and Commissioner Paulson has mentioned this before. Our industrial zoning districts and our research park districts are for those specific uses. And if you start allowing other uses, you water down the purpose of those districts. For example, the industrial park has had a lot of sports, what are those called?
Dance studio, sports stadium.
Yeah, exactly. And so you start squeezing out other land uses that, and frankly, that results in higher lease areas, right? Higher.
Right, so
We have
rents.
sales there, or a sales thing going on there now with furniture.
But there are 21 conditional uses allowed for this, for a research park. Is
Is that one of the conditions?
no, but in outdoor sales and display, outdoor open space and I mean.
But
there are
indoor
21
sales is
different
not,
things, so
is
why-
indoor sales is not a conditional use in the industrial district. And I think the theory was research parks and industrial districts are really supposed to be primarily employment-based land uses without a commercial clientele. People shopping, because the traffic pattern is different. And again, like industrial lands, commercial retail generally rents 4 to 5x higher per square foot. And so that was the theory, that was the worry in those industrial parks, that we want industrial land to make stuff. protect our employment base, and then you could put a dance studio in there, which, no offense to,
Right, no,
dance
I
studio, it's-
totally get
yeah.
that, but if we look at our code,
yeah.
we make 21 exceptions to that idea. And I'm just wondering, why would we limit, you can do
Mm.
outdoor sales, you can do drive-through or in-vehicle sales, but you can't do indoor sales. And that doesn't seem at all consistent.
It's already being done. I don't know, they must have had a conditional use permit.
Or,
We-
no,
we
it
have-
was, it lawfully existed prior to the
Yeah.
adoption of the
So-
new zoning ordinance.
So I'm looking at the table of land uses. Indoor sales and or service is only allowed as a land use in our 4 mixed-use districts. Period. It's not even allowed as a conditional use anywhere else. So it's only in our mixed-use zoning districts.
And
The-
that's fine, Mark, but do you see that there appears to be an inconsistency? Why would we,
Allow kitchens and.
yeah. What is it about indoor sales that would restrict them from being in the research park? Whereas everything else, dance studio is in there.
I think we're worried about big box retail buying up research park land at a cheaper price per square foot and then flipping it to big box retail, and then we've lost research park.
And I think Commissioner Paulson is correct in that, although I understand Alder Iro's point. There was a concept in the comprehensive plan called the corporate identity corridor, where we were trying to preserve land along the Beltline for larger office tenants that require that visibility from the Beltline. And one downside of permitting indoor sales would be that those sites would be ripe for, a super center or something like that, a retail type use, big box type use.
Sure.
Yes, Jeff.
Go ahead.
You can make the case kind of either way, right? But one of the things that someone mentioned here, that's permitted through conditional use would be a commercial entertainment. So you could build a movie theater. You could build a, spare time bowling facility kind of a thing on this property, on these properties in that zoning district, but you couldn't put a grocery store there. So, I mean, it seems inconsistent to me. And I get that, some of the mixed use districts allow it. But I don't know if you have like the suburban commercial zoning anymore that Madison has in some of these sites that allow, regular retail, goods and services to be sold. I didn't see that, in the zoning code, but it's hard to say that, Target's gonna buy up all the sites. Most of like the industrial type property doesn't have the traffic counts, doesn't have the visibility for that type of commercial activity. There's only a few of them here, and the research park zoning is very sporadic throughout the community, it seems. There's not much of it. The 2 sites that I mentioned, the Meritor and the Mounds, both seem to be weird to me that you couldn't do, just general retail sales.
Well, you could get it rezoned.
Abby and I talked about that, and that seemed unlikely given what the comprehensive plan suggests.
Mark, do we have a general retail district?
No, it's the mixed use.
Because we used to have
B1, B2, B3.
B1, B2.
B1 was office, B2 was commercial like University
then,
Avenue, and B3 was the Bruce County.
highway
area.
commercial,
Right, highway commercial.
and
right.
that was all B4.
The downtown, right?
If I could just say one more thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
In response to Commissioner Paulson's comments about rental rates and so forth, the RP zoning is on a lot of smaller properties where it's listed right now.
Hmm.
So, from a highest and best use for some of those properties, you might see convenience stores or what's permitted, fast food with drive-throughs. Those types of tenants or businesses will pay much higher rents than your traditional,
Mhm.
retail goods and services. So you're not getting away from some of that thought process either with this zoning.
Okay, thank you.
Daphne, can you show where the research park zoning is?
Yeah, it's this like medium gray color, so west of Laura Lane, this
Yeah.
small area by Nursery Drive, and then these like sporadic parcels off of Highway 14.
Which we felt was, our highway corridors was where these headquarter campuses like to be for visibility. Spectrum brands, that sort of thing.
And so like a corporate headquarters would be a research park or just office?
Well, office is one of the key permitted uses in
uses,
Research
okay.
Park. They're also allowed in all of our mixed use districts. Offices are allowed in many of our districts, but the primary principal uses in Research Park are office. Well, yeah, as he pointed out, restaurants and taverns are allowed. I'm sorry, I just my finger shifted. So office and personal or professional services, small scale public utilities. There's a couple other examples probably on the wrong page to see all this easily. Here's one, light industrial is allowed. Indoor storage and wholesaling. I'm sorry, that's, sorry, that's not allowed.
Well, we didn't-
Industrial zoning, sorry.
You have to go to the microphone, so.
Microphone, sorry.
I understand
people in
the
mind.
industrial zoning, not allowing retail. I mean, that makes sense. And most of what is out there in the business park, north of 14, is considered industrial. And you have some of those uses that are athletic related, but where else are they gonna go? They're not gonna go into the office park, that is a natural progression of where they want to go. And the research park zoning doesn't really include any of the property that I would consider research property in Middleton. None of the stuff over by Greenway is considered research park. That's all PUD. So these are just kind of outliers in my opinion.
Yeah.
And it's odd that you can't do, like the Mound site's a great example. It's a 16,000 square foot building. That could be a great specialty grocer. It could be, if we didn't have Ace Hardware up the street, it could be a great hardware store, that kind of thing. Which isn't permitted even though they've been there for
Yeah.
20 years,
Well,
It used to be highway commercial, right? That was the designation, yeah.
And the intent in this section says retail use may be permitted providing such uses are compatible with the adjoining research park uses and do not contribute to excessive congestion, alter the character, or otherwise detract from the primary purpose of the research park as a business/industrial employment center. So I think, making it a conditional use, again, if we make 21 exceptions,
Why not 22?
why not 22?
We didn't notice it, so we'd have to add it to the next round
Well, or have another hearing.
or have another hearing.
I have no problem with adding as a conditional use. I guess I just was giving the background that I think
Yeah.
we were trying to. This is the sort of thing that there are going to be some adjustments. Commercial kitchen is another good one where we thought, okay, this hasn't been working the way we expected exactly. So we did the best we could, and after a year, we're proposing some changes. And every few, Abby will tell you that it's been at least once a month we're like, there's another change we need to make to the zoning ordinance. And it's a little dispiriting on one hand, but on the other hand, it's you recognize it's a living, breathing document. You have to have rules in place for the orderly development and preservation of the city. And it's a big 300-page ordinance is going to have some.
The work in process.
Yeah.
Okay, any other input? For the group? If not, I'll adjourn the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Randy and Aaron
Thank you.
and
Thanks for
Commissioner
considering
Harp.
that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.